Welcome to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michele Lawrence. Join me as we venture beyond the mat into the fascinating intersections of yoga and health. Each episode brings you candid conversations with the visionary leaders and practitioners who are truly shaping this field, sharing their stories, insights, and the profound impact of yoga therapy in action. In today's episode, I had the distinct pleasure of speaking with Kayla Kurin. Kayla is a health and travel journalist, a comedy writer, and a storyteller from Canada, and the best-selling author of the Yoga for Chronic Illness series. Her extensive writing has appeared in publications like the Toronto Star and Yoga International, and she's lived and worked in over 50 countries. Wow. Constantly drawing her new perspectives into her narrative work. It's such a pleasure to meet you, Kayla, and to have you here today.
Yeah, you too, Michelle. I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, I'd love if we could just begin by having you share a bit about yourself, your journey, what drew you to yoga initially, and then health journalism and storytelling, and what personal experience inspired you to write your best-selling book, Yoga for Chronic Illness.
hmm So I started gathering chronic illnesses as a teenager, which was quite alarming because I was so young and was struggling to understand it alongside my doctors who were also struggling to understand it. So I had tried a lot of different things, tried medications, nothing was really helping. And then when I was in university, I was referred to an environmental health clinic. And through that clinic, I was able to do the MBSR program, which is
Mhm.
mindfulness-based stress reduction that's designed by John Kabat-Zinn. So that was my first introduction to yoga and meditation. And that was the first thing where over time, like in the 8 weeks of the program, I didn't feel drastically better, but I didn't feel worse, which at that point was
Mm.
a pretty big thing for anything
Mhm.
physical that I was doing. And then over time, as I continued practicing the yoga and the meditation, I started feeling better and better and better. I was also making changes to my diet and my lifestyle and just kind of outlook on illness. So yoga and meditation became a really regular part of my life and a really powerful tool for me for managing some of the symptoms of my illness and also a framework for how we think about who is healthy and who is not healthy and what that really means. So then in 2014 I studied to be a yoga teacher and I always had the intention of working with other people with chronic illnesses. There are a lot of studios and yoga teachers who focus on the general population, and I really enjoy those classes and those teachers too. But I also knew from personal experience that a lot of those classes are not accessible to people who are sick or who are disabled. So I knew that I really wanted to focus on that demographic. So I started teaching in 2015 in the UK and then kind of all over the world since. So my inspiration to write the books was kind of twofold. One was that, so many people with chronic illnesses or disabilities aren't able to work, and being able to get a book from your library or purchase a book for less than $10. Maybe the print copy is a little bit more than that, but the ebook for less than that, is very accessible. And also because I was moving around and traveling around so much, doing classes in person was not always the most practical, but I mean, it's still super important and super important to find a teacher you like. And I always love teaching in person, but that was kind of the inspiration to delve more into the writing side of things, was really to make it more accessible to a broader audience and also to adapt a little bit to my lifestyle that's kind of nomadic.
Very cool and really interesting to kind of see how your own personal journey really morphed into a way to bring this to help others. Um, and you've got so many talents too, right? And I would say, from what I know, your work really sits at a powerful intersection. Journalism, so you know how to write, which is a huge asset. Comedy, which I don't know anything about yet. Travel, which we've already alluded to a bit. And your personal experience with and knowledge of chronic illness now, right?
Mhm.
And so, how has your experience navigating stigma and identity, which she wrote about, informed the way you approach chronic health issues in your writing and your yoga practice?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I've always had so many interests and so many things that I wanted to do. And when I was at my sickest moments, I really worried that I was not going to be able to do them. And so one thing that I think, I see through the lens of this illness is just how exciting it is to be able to do these things like travel and doing comedy and doing journalism. And that all kind of stems from these practices of yoga and meditation, amongst other things. It's just being able to really feel the joy and how that spills over into other areas and opens up other things. And yeah, comedy is a lot of fun, and I think that so much writing we get from people who are chronically ill or disabled can be really sad and really earnest, which is, very necessary. But I think sometimes we just need to laugh more, and, just because somebody is ill doesn't mean that they don't have joy and happiness also. And I also think it's a coping mechanism. I did have a chronic illness sketch team called Sick Bay, so those videos are still online. And I write for a website called The Squeaky Wheel, which is a disability news satire website. And I think it's just very cathartic to be able to look at the things sick and disabled people face in a satirical way.
I could definitely see the need for that. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so your writing has been featured on platforms like Yoga International and Matador Network. Can you share how you use storytelling and narrative, whether true or invented, to communicate complex health concepts or therapeutic needs to a broad audience? Maybe it's even some of that satire too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I do think satire is really important and being able to pull back a little bit and especially look at the broader societal issues. And there are many different theories of illness and disability, and one that really resonates with me is that people are not really disabled. The problem is that society is only set up for a very limited amount of people. So I'm not physically disabled, but for example, somebody in a wheelchair, it's not that they can't get around or get to things, it's that sidewalks don't have dips or buildings don't have accessible entrances. If we had built buildings with accessible entrances from the beginning, it wouldn't be such a big thing that these people are in a wheelchair because it would never really have impacted them in those same ways, at least that part of being able to access spaces. And I do think that those things have a spillover effect to everybody. So, again, with the wheelchair example, if we have, more dips in the sidewalks at crosswalks, that helps wheelchair users. That also helps parents who are pushing strollers. That also helps older people who are maybe having arthritis or might need to walk with a cane, and it might be a big step up to get onto the sidewalk. So, I think those things really spill over. And I think, yeah, using satire and using storytelling to not just use my personal experiences, but to look at broader frameworks of health and disability and accessibility, I think is really powerful. And I hope will spread those ideas a bit further, especially to people who are not chronically ill, who just haven't had to think of that and are probably want to make their communities more accessible, but just haven't thought about it and don't quite know how. And yeah, I just think storytelling is very powerful. I use my own stories a lot because I've had personal experiences with a lot of these things. One of the great things about journalism is the excuse to interview a lot of other people and talk to a lot of other people. So hear their stories and hear their expertise. And then, yeah, with the comedy, it's just being able to fictionalize and exaggerate so many of those stories that I've experienced or that I've heard from other people to get a point across that's still like fun and interesting, but also hopefully helpful to just the broader community.
Mm-hmm. Really helpful. I'd love to also hear a bit about the perspective that you have based on your international travel. 50 countries is what I mentioned earlier that
Mhm.
you've lived in. And so, is that right?
traveled, stayed longish term, but yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah.
been on the smaller number.
So you must have a unique perspective then on how to live well while traveling extensively and maybe even living with the health challenges that you've had, right? Living well with that as well. And so some of our listeners might be feeling stuck or restricted by health conditions. So, what practical wisdom can you offer from your global adventures that helps them live fully right now, whether they're in their home that they intend to stay in or if they want to travel and explore outside of their home area?
Mhm. That's a good question, and I think it depends a lot on what somebody's illness or disability is. So there is a writer called Graham Isidore who is blind, and he has written about traveling with blindness, and it's been a real pleasure to read those pieces, and that's extremely different to my experiences, even though we're both writing in the same vertical, so to speak. And, that is a lot about are airlines or trains or buses accessible to people who aren't able to see? Is there braille when you are at a museum or at a tourist attraction and there's a plaque with a description? Is that accessible to people? So I don't have to think about any of those things when I travel. I don't have to think about which places are wheelchair accessible. So it can be really different depending on what the accessibility issues are. And it can be really different from place to place. So, for example, a lot of places in Europe where we have much older cities can be much harder to navigate if you struggle to walk because there's a lot of cobblestone streets. There's a lot of old buildings that have stairs up to them. Whereas in North America, there's a lot more places where you can find more accessible cities because they're newer. So it can really depend a lot. So, all that preamble to say that for me, I've done a lot of travel for my health to places where I feel better. I find that I am very sensitive to the environment and very sensitive to food. So there are certain places around Latin America, around Europe, around Asia, where I know that if I go and spend a few months there, I will feel better without having to think about it so much. When I'm in Canada, I have to be really conscientious about what I'm eating, about keeping up with my yoga and meditation practice, about not overcommitting, because the climate and the environment and the food is, I think, sometimes harder for my body to process.
Mhm.
Whereas when I spent some time in Costa Rica, and I've written about this in the Toronto Star or in Cambodia or Mexico, there's something about the climate and the environment and the way that food is farmed and processed that sits better with me. And I think also the culture, and this is just me theorizing, I don't have the science on this, but I also think places that have cultures that are a bit more open or a bit more laid back, that are kind of on my circadian rhythm. I have a later circadian rhythm. I'm late to everything. I don't like to have breakfast before 10 or dinner before 8. So finding those places where I feel like I don't have to change myself so much to fit into the natural rhythm of society can really alleviate some stress, which just makes everything better. So for me, I've really experimented and found those places where I feel good, and then I can go back to them regularly. So I feel I have to think more about accessibility in my home country than I do abroad. But that is not true for everybody with a chronic illness or a disability. But that's,
Mhm.
yeah, my experiences, yeah, being able to travel to find places where I feel more well.
Very cool and very interesting insight. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, your book series focuses on chronic illness. Maybe you could share some of the major themes or premises of that series, particularly regarding how yoga supports someone when the goal isn't necessarily a cure, but
Mhm.
learning to live well with a condition.
Mhm. I think that a big core theme of the books is that if you're somebody with a chronic illness, you have a lot of stress, whether or not stress contributed to those factors. And when I was writing these books, I was using the term stress as so much more research on trauma has come out. I might have used the word trauma a little bit more, whether that's inherited intergenerational trauma or trauma throughout your life. Um, these things all make it more difficult. to function. And I know there are some researchers who think that leads to more illness. It's definitely a higher likelihood of having illness if you experiences these stressors or these traumas. But I'm not a psychiatrist or a doctor, so I don't speak to that so much. But what I know is that if you have these high levels of stress, it's going to be difficult for your body to heal. So, if I, with my chronic illnesses, I will have like pain in certain parts of my body or feel fatigue or have hormonal dysfunctions. To me, it's not so important what caused them, but how I cannot make it worse. And stress makes everything worse. And we know that yoga calms the nervous system and can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. So I think the core idea of the books is that yoga is not a path for a cure, but if we can reset our nervous systems and give our bodies a chance to rest when they've probably been on high alert for a very long time, then our internal processes can start to do some healing. And even if our illness is not healable in that way, you can avoid kind of secondary conditions. So if my first condition is the pain, but then I also have the stress and worry, that's a secondary condition. If I can remove the stress and worry, then I'm just dealing with the pain. And that's better than also having the stress and worry. So I guess that's kind of the core theme of the book is if we can use yoga to reduce stress, and I think it's very powerful. Like yoga is a very powerful tool to do that. For me, I think more so than meditation, because if you are somebody with a lot of anxiety or with a lot of stress or a lot of trauma, meditation, I think, can be very powerful, but also very difficult. Whereas yoga is kind of working backwards rather than trying to calm the brain to calm the body. You're trying to calm the body to calm the brain. And so, yeah, I would say that's the core approach to the book. And then just really trying to make yoga poses accessible to everybody and encouraging people to follow their own body's cues because everybody is different. And again, that can be something that's so unvalidating. I don't know if that's a word, unvalidating to people with chronic illnesses is not being believed, being told what they think is wrong with them is not wrong. And yoga is a place where it really just is just how it feels in your body. So really encouraging people to play around and try different things and try the variations on the poses and find what works well and then do more of that.
Mhm, mhm. That's really great and very aligned with how I understand, many of our approaches to health and the whole person, really, not just one aspect of themselves, but how we can work with lots of different aspects of ourselves to whether it be work with a condition or improve overall health and well-being.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to share with our listeners about your recent work or your writing projects or anything new that's coming?
Hmm. Yeah, so my three books, Yoga for Chronic Pain, for Chronic Fatigue, and for Insomnia, are all available on Amazon and some libraries and bookstores, so you can check your local places first. And then, yeah, writing projects. I've been doing a lot of just freelance writing on health, so those things will be coming about. And a big project that I'm working on is about the health and travel piece and kind of how I've traveled the world in search of these places where I feel better. So, yeah, I don't have too much to say about that right now, but if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, kaylakurin.com or arogayoga.com, both of them work, then yeah, I'll be sending out updates on that project as they come.
Very exciting. Thank you. So, last question, and I love to end the podcast typically this way, is to find out really how you sustain yourself on a daily basis through your yoga practices. And in our program of teaching folks to become yoga therapists, we put a big emphasis on that because we know that in order to help others, we first have to have our own steady practices that we can. Um, Help us find stability and presence and know what works from our own sort of laboratory of one, right? So I wonder if you could share with us a bit about what you might do on a regular basis with your own practices to maintain your health and wellness.
For sure. This has changed a lot over the years. When I first started practicing and then first started teaching, I was more diligent about really building a daily practice into my routine. And over the years, I have found that being less diligent is really important for me. And it ties in actually to the writing piece as well. There's some writing advice out there that says if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. And then a lot of women started talking about that and being like, well, that seems very, traditional man, that you don't have to worry about your laundry or the cooking or your sick child, that you have the time to sit and write every day. And that, you sometimes you write every day and sometimes you write once a month, and that's fine. If you're writing, you're a writer. And I feel the same about yoga. And again, goes back to the piece of what a huge thing yoga taught me is to listen to my own body and to trust in my own body. And that's something that I wasn't getting from the medical system. So some weeks rather, I do an hour or a 90-minute practice every day. Some weeks maybe I'm doing 10 minutes a day. Some weeks maybe I'm not practicing at all. And it's really just checking in with the body. And my body will tell me if I haven't done a practice for a week or two. My body is quite vocal about that, because I will really feel it. So I think being really flexible on how you build yoga into your life for me is really important. And I think it's better to do 10 minutes, better to do something once a week than just say, well, if I'm not doing it every day, then what's the point? So for me, that's really important. Sometimes I will set myself a goal of doing 15 minutes a day. And if I do more than that, that's great. But I'm always amazed at how much just 10 or 15 minutes a day done consistently really makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that and everything else. And I'm excited to learn more from you. And I'll look for your new works that are coming out. And it was really a pleasure to meet you and speak with you today, Kayla.
You too. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks again for listening. If you're interested to learn more about who we are and what we do, check us out at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.